treading the boards again just 3 weeks later. Soon they were leaning upon Boston's theater-goers with shows for the benefit of Mrs. Poe. Theater had a culture of such shows. Perusing Boston newspapers that same month, one finds benefits for Mrs. Poe, Master Payne, Messrs. Stockwell and Barnard, Mr. and Mrs. Barnes, and Miss Warsaw, a testament to the changeless struggle of artists to earn their way. In their scramble for desperately needed money, neither parent could care for Edgar much. Scarcely a month after his birth, Edgar joined his brother Henry with their grandparents in Baltimore. He rejoined his parents 6 months later in New York City, but the infant's new home was not an entirely happy one. Manhattan newspapers tolerated neither mumblers nor stumblers. One critic labeled David Poe a muffin face and mercilessly dubbed him Dan Dilly after he mispronounced a character named Dandoli. Over the next 2 years, David Poe would respond with the melancholy predictability of foolish men. He got angry, he drank, and then he abandoned his wife and children. There was no reconciliation, nor could there be. David died in obscurity soon afterwards. He left behind the newborn and sickly Rosalie, born after a theatrical run by her mother in Virginia, and soon Mrs. Poe herself was ailing. In November 1811, one Richmond local wrote, "Mrs. Poe, who as you know is a very handsome woman, happens to be very sick and, having quarreled and parted with her husband, is destitute." A visitor recalled finding the children thin and pale and very fretful, and being hushed by an old nurse with nips of opium and gin-soaked bread. Soon an ominous notice appeared in the Richmond Enquirer for another benefit show. Mrs. Poe, lingering on the bed of disease and surrounded by her children, asks your assistance, and asks it for perhaps the last time. This was no exaggeration. A month later, one could spot the well-to-do Richmond merchant John Allan and his wife Frances spending the Christmas holiday at a friend's plantation, and toddling alongside them through the snow, a bewildered and newly adopted young orphan named Edgar. He was now, an aunt wrote, truly the child of fortune. Poe was born into a life of art, but adopted into one of commerce, and from this uneasily mixed parentage both the name and the career of Edgar Allan Poe would emerge. For just as Eliza Poe was a great talent in her profession, so was John Allan in retailing. At the Richmond dry goods warehouse of Ellis & Allen, one could find everything from sheet music to coal shovels, chamber door locks to window glass, and heaped piles of superfine broadcloths and kerseymires. A bluff and hard-headed merchant, Allan was a Scotsman turned American, adopted by the country he'd emigrated to in 1795. Though one contemporary described him as rather rough and uncultured, Allan also possessed more subtle qualities. Like many a hard-driven merchant, he'd never had a college education and could seem alternately dismissive and ardent in his admiration for culture. "Gods, what would I not give if I had his talent for writing?" he once wrote of Shakespeare. The survival of 615 volumes of Ellis & Allen commercial correspondence do not hint at a man with much time to fulfill such dreams, but he acquired the trappings of culture for his prosperous household. They would never lack for Shakespeare, nor for a costly Rees's Cyclopedia or a piano in the parlor. The Allens had both been orphaned as children themselves. At 31, John was now a respectable Richmond merchant with no offspring, none by his rather frail wife, Frances, at least. It was Frances who pressed for taking in little Edgar, and by 1812 the Allen ledgers show the telltale touches of parenthood. Amid the fine horses and casks of brandy are orders for diminutive suits of clothing, doctor's visits for croup, and a child-size bed. Edgar was, visitors recalled, a lovely little fellow with dark curls and brilliant eyes, dressed like a little prince. Yet he was a prince of uncertain peerage. John hadn't formally adopted him, perhaps imagining that Poe's relatives would decide to raise him, as they had with his siblings, Henry and Rosalie. But as weeks passed into